Hi, my name is Brianna Moskitz. I'm with the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington. You can find us at fabricpatch.net, and we're ready to do our second block of our Color Dance Block of the Month. All right, so we're ready for month 2. So last month we did just a fun little pinwheel block with a little border around it. And this month we're doing kind of a twofer. So we're going to, if you have your pattern with you, may have already looked at that we're gonna do a bunch of little mini pinwheels along with a chain block. So we're just going to touch on the half square triangles really quick because we did it all last month. I'm going to talk an extra trimming tip. If you struggled or maybe didn't really like trimming, which is a basic ruler, I'm going to show you a block lock ruler. I'm also going to show you this slotted trim ruler. Not one of my favorite rulers, but I'm going to show you one just in case it's kind of your cup of tea. So I'm going to show you some trimming tips with your half square triangles, and then we're mostly going to talk about this chain block. So let's go ahead and talk about cutting real fast. Okay, so when you're cutting, so again, you're going to need your pattern. If you don't have the pattern, we carry it at the shop. You just need your Color Dance pattern. We don't really talk a whole lot about measuring or how many you need so that you can get your pattern. But month 2, you'll see, oh, let me get there. There's a whole lot of cutting to be happening on this guy. So I suggest just put on a nice soothing music, get your favorite ruler and mat ready and start cutting. Go ahead, use your friction marker because again, your friction marker is going to go off with heat. That means you can totally write on your pattern, and then when you're done with all your notes, taking your little notes, just hit it with your iron and these marks will go away, unless you want your notes permanent for the next time you make this quilt. But as you're cutting, you're going to have a bunch of different colors. To make all of these mixed pinwheels, you're going to go through a lot of fabric. Again, she's going to show you what colors she says to use. Don't focus on that. If this totally stresses you out, pick whatever colors you want. It doesn't matter. She has just decided which colors to use so that it's evenly dispersed through your whole quilt. So pick your colors out. They're all marked. And as you're cutting, what I did is I used my friction pen and wrote Q1 and I clipped it with my little binder clip right there. And then I have them all together. So as I'm going through my list, I can check off, I did that one, I did this one. If you get interrupted by the phone, the dog needed going out, a kid, you're able to know where you're at when you come back to keep cutting. This block I feel like is very important for accurate cutting. The half square triangles aren't a huge problem because we do trim those. But if you remember from last month, when we trim them, we're trimming off little pieces of waste. So to be able to get that, 2.5 or 3 inch finished half square triangle, we're trimming off little bits. So keep in mind it is still accurate to be able to cut accurate. And then our chain block, you'll see as she's listing, so J, K, or N, depending on if you're doing the bright, the bold, or the shy colorway, it's your background. We're cutting a ton of background squares, and they're going to be listed as a pinwheel unit or a chain block. Again, the pinwheel is this guy, and our chain, I'm going to show on this one, is this block right here that I showed you just a minute ago. So when you're cutting your chain, it is also extremely important you're accurately cutting your squares and your rectangle pieces. Now I'm going to show you a little tip as we talk about how to construct this one, that if you are a novice cutter and you are already feeling discouraged, I have a trick to help you with these. So go ahead and start cutting your squares out and leave these background rectangles for last, and we'll talk about those. And then we're going to, of course, construct a bunch of half square triangle units. And she tells you on the back of this how many to make. So what this is, this took me a minute to figure out what this little chart meant. But what it means is you're going to make 2 units, 1 unit, so 2 pinwheels, 1 pinwheel using the Q, which means if you come over here, you're going to see, oh, Q is, this bright teal. You're going to make 2 bright teal pinwheels to go with these, or just make them. It doesn't matter. you know you're going to have to end up with a whole bunch of pinwheels to make this happen. So all of your, I think, 3-inch squares are going to turn into pinwheels. So when we're making half square triangles, again, you're going to take 2 pieces, a color and a background, right sides together. Take your quick quarter ruler, or you can use, of course, any straight edge. I just like this one because it gives me my center line along with my 1/4 inch line in case I'm not 100% confident in my 1/4 inch. We're going to mark down the inside of my quick quarter ruler and the outside, and that's going to give me something that looks like that. Whereas the dash line here is my cut line, and these solid lines are my 1/4 inch lines that I will be sewing on. And then you're going to end up with something like that. Here's my cut line, my seams. Again, we did this quite a bit last month. We talked about all of these. And then you can either use your rotary cutter or a pair of scissors. It's up to you. Cut on that line in the middle. And now we've got 2 half square triangle units. So half of our pinwheel already ready to go. And then let's go ahead real fast. Let me talk about 2 other trimming tricks for you with your half square triangles. So we've made our half square triangle units. Last month we talked about trimming these guys up with our basic 6x24, 6x12, whatever basic ruler you have at home. We talked about trimming it that way using our wet erase marker, all that jazz. If you want to go back and check that out, feel free. And this month we're going to talk about 2 different rulers. We're going to talk about a block lock ruler and also this clearly perfect slotted trimmed ruler. Now I like one better than the other one, and I will tell you why. One, you press your half square triangles first, the others you don't. So I have 2 here. So half square triangles have been made. We're going to go ahead and trim this guy first. So a block lock ruler, now it is kind of an expensive ruler, and I'm not really a gadget girl, but if you are someone who is in the market of making a whole bunch of half square triangles, I really like a block lock. A block lock comes in a ton of sizes, all the way down to a 1.5 inch square, all the way up to I think an 8.5 inch square. I have to say a 6-inch square is the best bang for your buck if you're doing half square triangles, because usually if you get over a 6-inch square, it's easier to just use your basic ruler to trim them. So what's cool about a block lock is on the back of your ruler, this kind of fuzzied out part is actually a cutout with a lip on it, so that when you press your half square triangle, whether you press it to the dark or the color, depending on however you do it. I always press the dark. It creates so there's no shadow. But what's going to happen is you're going to put your ruler on top of your half square triangle, and you're going to, it's going to butt up. See how it's now butted up against that seam? And it has this nice secure, so what's really important, like we talked about last month, is that that diagonal line is what you're basing your trim off of. Because you can trim up any block to 2.5 inches, doesn't mean it's going to be square. Does that make sense? So we're going to butt up our pressed edge against our block lock. We can see we're trimming this guy to 2.5 inches. You can see that line. You can use your wet erase marker to mark that for you if you want to. But again, with the color dance pattern, she does not give you a whole lot of room for waste, which is okay. But we just need to know we're just trimming off a little bits. So we can see, we can even bring this up a little more. So we cut off a little bit of each side. And we're going to cut the side and the top. And then I'm going to twist this guy, and also at the same time twist my ruler and nudge it in here. If we do not twist our ruler, let me show you, it doesn't lock, it does lock in, but see where it locks in? Our point is way over here instead of right here. It locks in on the wrong groove. So when you twist your block, twist your ruler. Just twist it. If you flip it, we're not locking anywhere. So you just want to twist your block, twist your ruler. And then it's going to lock into that press. See that? And now we're going to again line up our 2.5, our 2.5, and trim. And there is a perfectly trimmed 2.5 inch square. And a whole lot of pretty simple. I mean, really, we're locking in, We're making sure we're gonna get where we're gonna go and cut. There's not a whole lot of finagling, marking, making sure that line is straight off that 45° from last month. I feel like it's not one of those, oh my gosh, I really have to concentrate, I need 10 minutes with no interruptions. This one would really be easy. You could easily trim, flip, trim. Oh, the phone rang. Oh, company finally made it. You could easily get back on track without having to reset your mind to concentrate really, really difficultly. I feel like that lock makes it a whole lot easier. So here's the other one. The other one is this Clearly Perfect slotted trimmer. Now I have to tell you, we do not carry this one in our shop. But here's the trick of it. I'm going to do it backwards so you guys can see it. When you line up this block, so we have made our half square triangle unit. It is not pressed yet. It is just cut in half, ready for the next step. So this ruler is the next step is to now trim it. So you have a dashed line that is going to sit on your seam line and a solid line that's going to sit on your cut line. And then what it is intended to do is for you to cut, and cut into the slots. And when you trim up the edges, that's of course going to square up your block. This little slotted cut is to cut off those little dog ears. And the dog ears are these little guys right here. And we of course cut those off when we trimmed it earlier. So let me cut this real fast. I'm going to twist mine. So we're going to cut, cut the slot, cut the slot, and then now you're ready to press. And you'll press that open and be ready to start sewing. So here's my little life quilting according to me, which doesn't mean anything. But for me, a block lock ruler is going to trim after it's pressed before it pressed. We have all seen those blocks that look fantastic. Then we start pressing them. We have a weird little flare that's going to happen. You know, you can even see this one here. It's straight and then it kind of fills out this way. And for me, I feel like, how is this accurately cut after I press it? A whole lot of things can happen in while we're pressing. One, we can distort it if we're pulling too much. If we put too much pressing product on here, we can flare out a little piece accidentally. But then you can't retrim this up. This is what it is, and then you press. And then you hope that you're a good presser so that nothing else in the end happens. You also are hoping that you get this pressed all the way open. We've all been there where we press a block open and we didn't quite get it all the way open. And then when we get to trimming, we notice, oh my gosh, look, I totally missed. There's like an 1/8 inch sticking in that seam still. So again, this one will have to be retrimmed anyways, because we didn't press it long, or we're going to be super frustrated with that dang pinwheel because this one block didn't fit, the other 3 did. So that's my only apprehension with this particular ruler, is I feel like we need to start with a pristine product, a pristine half square triangle, a pristine square, and then trim, where this is saying piece, trim, then press, and hope everything is hunky-dory. So that's just for me. I feel like with a block lock, again, with it being however we seamed it, however we cut this, maybe our scissors got a little crazy, maybe our 8-year-old niece was cutting for us, and that particular line came in a little bit because that straight line wasn't cut. That could make this be a little finicky. If our seam wasn't perfectly straight or a perfect 1/4 inch, that could make this ruler a little bit finicky. So I feel like with a block lock or with a traditional ruler, there's a little bit more confidence in cutting. Whereas this is going to butt up against that seam regardless. It's going to take all of it. And you can see just by this one, here's our 2.5, 2.5. See that flare here? How there's stuff to be cut here and nothing right here? And this is a pretty good line, I have to say. That's going to be a pretty good 1/8 inch all the way across. This one is not. We've got an 1/8 inch to almost nothing. And my question is, how do I know it cut correctly on this one? So that's just trimming half square triangles according to me. You do whatever you feel like you want to do. If you're like, oh, I got this pressing thing down, I've been quilting for years, I am totally fine, go for it. And you are someone who loves half square triangles, go for it. Same thing here. This one is a little bit to nothing, and this is a whole lot of nothing. Again, my question is, how did this know that? It probably did. I'm going to say it probably did. But then you have to trust in your pressing ability. And me, who's been quilting for, I don't know, since I was 6, I'm pretty sure I'm a good presser, but I don't know. And maybe it's just my habit. I've always been taught, let's press and then do our next step. And our press, and now we're going to trim, not piece, trim, press. So it's totally up to you. You can get either these rulers and trim, or again, use like last month and use just the rulers you have intact. So I have to say, this one, I know a block lock ruler is expensive, and I know their only purpose is to be trimming half square triangle units. So this is a one-trick pony rule. Same thing with your rule, and I have to say I borrowed this one from somebody else, from Denise, and I do not know how much this ruler is, but that's just my quilting tips according to me. So there is your trimming tip for this month. If you want to use a specialty ruler, if you have a friend who has one, borrow one. Say, hey, I have to trim a whole bunch of half square triangles. Can I borrow your stuff? Borrow it. Before you spend the 30 bucks or the 20 bucks to buy a new ruler, borrow one for something else. The other thing I want to add just for a hot second is, since we're making a large number of half square triangle units, and we're cutting our background, we're cutting a ton of 3-inch squares. Go ahead and check out the next video that's going to air, is about a shape cut ruler. Now I have to say, she's kind of a one-trick pony too. She cuts strips and squares, but in an 18-inch span where you don't have to move your ruler and cut, move your ruler and cut. It's pretty slick. Some of you guys might have it in your stash, or gifted it, inherited it, or maybe have been looking for something to effectively cut a large amount of strips or a large amount of squares at one time. I have to say that's how I cut all of my 3-inch background squares and my 1.5-inch strips for our next chain block. So check that out. That video will go out next. It's a really cool ruler. I think everyone should have one, but check that out if you are sick of cutting 3-inch squares already. Okay, I want to touch one more point on half square triangles and the rulers. So if you have been in the quilting for a while, you know that quilting is all about units. We are using squares, rectangles, half square triangles, and that makes up the majority of all of our quilt patterns. So us as a quilter who are avid quilters, we probably make thousands of half square triangles in a year, to be honest. And we also cut solid squares. So the block lock, for me being a one-trick pony kind of girl, I go through a lot of half square triangles without even meaning to go through a lot of half square triangles. So I find that this 6-inch block lock ruler is something I always grab. It's easy to trim. If I'm doing anything bigger than that, I find it easier to use my bigger ruler. There's a whole lot to see. You can get them in sets. You can get them in all different sizes. Now I have to say, if you have been in our store and you thought, oh, I didn't know you sold block locks, we don't. The reason why is Block Lock themselves has their own Amazon store. So us as friends, I'm going to tell you a friend trick. Go on Amazon, buy it off of the Block Lock page. They're going to give you free shipping, or you can wait a little longer and get free shipping. So it's going to give you a little cheaper of a ruler without going directly to a quilt shop. Now, that being said, us as a fabric patch, we do have a Amazon storefront. So I'm going to link the Block Lock store in our Amazon storefront. So if you go into the descriptions, you can click on that link and it'll take you right to the Block Lock store on Amazon. So you're getting the Block Lock ruler. Now, I have to say, I do not think there is any knockoff on Block Lock rulers. So that's not really something to worry about, but you need to know these rulers, you're not going to find one of these for $8. So if you find, oh my gosh, I got a great deal on my Block Lock ruler, I paid $8. It's not a Block Lock ruler. It's not. I want to say this one ruler is probably $18 to $22. They are expensive, but they're going to last you your lifetime, and maybe even if you're passing your quilting stuff down to a granddaughter or a daughter. So that's why I say half square triangles, it's a quilter's jam. Same thing with 3-inch squares, 3x5 rectangles, whatever that is. That shape cut, which I wish I brought one back, I did not see it. It's slotted. It has a slot every ½ inch. It will make you be able to cut 50 3-inch squares in 2 minutes. It is so slick, so fast. Everyone needs to have one. Cutting your 7 2.5-inch strips for binding. You can cut that in a minute, and you're ahead of the game for cutting your, making your binding. So watch that video that comes up next. If you have a shape cut in your repertoire and you just, I've never used it, I'm not sure how to use it, we'll show you how. If you are looking for a gift for your quilter friend who has everything, and you don't think she has that ruler, it's a good gift. Okay, so half square triangles. We're done talking about half square triangles. But our chain block. So this is a very cool block. It is a very kind of intimidating block. If you're a new quilter, this might look a little scary. It's a very easy to put on. Essentially, we're starting with a center block. We're going to put on a top border and a bottom border. And then we're going to put on a side pieced border. And then we're just going to keep going around and around and around. What's really cool about a chain block is it is an awesome alternating block. So if you are someone who loves 10-inch squares, you love layer cakes, but you're kind of sick of just sewing them all together and gifting it that way, alternate your 10-inch layer cake blocks with a chain block, and it looks like it's taken you days and weeks and months to make this awesome quilt where it's super fast to put together. So when you're making your chain block, you're starting with, let's say, your 2.5-inch center and your 2.5-inch wide first border. So the pattern does tell you to cut all of these rectangles up, and you totally can. If you're a confident cutter and you are sure you have a 1/4-inch seam allowance, cut away. If you struggle with your 1/4 inch, I have 2 tips for you. The first one is get a seam guide tool. So this is one that we carry. I think it's like $8 from It's So Emma. What you have is you have these little holes cut into your ruler. What this is for is you put your needle down right through this 1/4-inch hole. Just rotate your needle so it sits down. Put a basic foot on it, a basic utility foot, if you don't have a 1/4-inch foot. Now, most machine brands, whether it's a Singer or a Brother or a Pfaff or anybody out there, they're going to be able to sell you a 1/4-inch foot, which every quilter needs to have. If you are someone who cannot find one that fits, you struggle with it more often than not, put on a basic foot and go ahead and reset your needle position. And this will be a quarter, from this edge of this ruler to the center of that dot is a true 1/4 inch. And you can adjust your needle position to sit right there. My offer to you is when you have done that, go ahead, take your front of your pattern and just write yourself a note in a pencil, in a pen, something that's not going to heat away, and say needle position at 1.3. And that will remind you to get your true 1/4 inch set before you start sewing. Because this block in particular it's very important. Now, if you are someone who uses a scant 1/4 inch, that's okay. For me, I feel like let's just get the 1/4 inch set. Now, if your 1/4 inch is just a tad small, that's probably okay. If your 1/4 inch is a tad too big, you're going to struggle because every one of your blocks is going to be too small. Now, when you're sewing just 5-inch squares together or you're doing some basic simple piecing, you're probably never going to even notice. But a project like Color Dance, like Cindy's doing the Jay's Bouquet, when you're doing very particular blocks that have to come in a very particular size or your quilt's not going to come together, you're going to struggle. So this particular block, if it's too small, our whole unit at the end of the day is going to be too small, and now we're going to have to come up with a plan B. How do we make this block big enough or small enough to fit in this kind of mashup of blocks? So get yourself a true 1/4 inch. I'll show you up close how to use this piece if you're not sure. So you're going to be able to see your ruler. You need to be able to read all of your letters correctly from left to right. If they look a little backwards, you need to flip your ruler over the correct way. It's only going to read one way. There's a lot of other 1/4 inch seam allowance feet options, and hopefully your machine comes with one or has the option of getting one. You can see they come in a variety of different ways. I've got a plastic foot with little flange, a metal foot. This is another one that's the same idea, same true 1/4 inch, just looks different. If you don't have any of these in your stash of feet for your machine, you can take just your basic utility foot. It could even be a super wide one, it doesn't matter. Just a basic utility foot, and we're going to turn this into a true 1/4 inch foot. We're going to take our seam guide, we're going to lay it underneath our foot, and we're going to put our presser foot down so that the edge of the ruler is at the edge of that foot. I'm just going to slide it across so it's nice and flush right here. I'm going to move it up so that I can see my 1/4 of an inch hole right there. I'm going to rotate my needle down just a little bit to see where it hits on my little ruler, and I can see it needs to be scooted over. So I'm going to use my machine and move my needle positioning so that it is closer to, we're going to go to the right more, we're going to keep going, I'm going to try again, and there we are. My needle goes right through that hole. So once I have the true 1/4 inch going on, what I suggest you do, write that down somewhere on the pattern you're using, the project you're working on, a little sticky note to stay on your machine that I moved my needle position to the right to 2.0. On my machine is what it says, 2.0. Yours could be 1.5. It could be anything different. It could even be a dial on your machine, and it might be at dial 3. Whatever it is for your machine, make that note so that you know you'll have a true 1/4 of an inch when we move our needle position. And then we can start sewing. And then when we start sewing, let me just take a little scrap piece of fabric here. And we're going to just put our fabric at the very edge of our presser foot. And we're going to go ahead and sew. Cut our thread. And then I'm going to go ahead and take your same seam guide, because you have all your holes. So again, all those holes are really cool if you want to do a hem stitch for curtains, for pants, for anything. I mean, you do the whole shebang. If you're going to do a quilting idea and you want to be an inch in from every seam, you can do the same thing. Just set that on your machine, you're good to go. It also comes with some rulers, so I can go ahead and check my 1/4 inch, and sure enough, my seam is around the edge of my ruler, and there's my 1/4 inch mark, and I am spot on to a accurate 1/4 inch seam. The other thing you can do is you can check your feet. So if you have dropped your 1/4 inch foot with a flange multiple times, you've still taken it back from your cat, it wouldn't hurt to check to make sure that that flange hasn't been tweaked anyway to make your 1/4 inch incorrect. Because every once in a while it does happen. Things do wear out. Things don't like to be dropped or cat handled very often. So that is how you use any seam guide to make sure you have a true 1/4 of an inch every time you get to your sewing machine. So as we're sewing, if you're got your 1/4 of an inch but you're still not, you're cutting, you're not super confident, here's a trick. Instead of cutting all of your rectangles out like your pattern says, just cut your 1.5 inch strips. Just cut those into strips. Start with your 4 2.5 inch rectangles. So these little guys. So I'm gonna set this up here. So here's our center block. We're gonna set our 4 matching rectangles. And we're gonna also take our 4 1.5 inch squares, and we'll set these up. Again, this block is just made up of squares and rectangles. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew the top rectangle to our square and the bottom to our square. So then we're going to come up with, let's just say this guy. Okay, and then we're going to sew our square to our rectangle and our square to our rectangle. And our square to our rectangle. Now we have 3 different blocks. We've got your kind of a sashing block, let's say. Square, rectangle, square, rectangle, square, rectangle, square, rectangle, square. We're going to sew those together. When we sew those together, remember those nestling of seams. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew these together, and I'm going to show you one more time a quick nestling of seams, because we talked about nestling when we did the pinwheel block, but it looks a little different with just basic squares and rectangles. So I went ahead and sewed these units together, and now we're going to sew right sides together this way. So again, when I pressed these, I pressed everything to the dark, or in my case, to the background. And sometimes that's an easy way to think about it if you struggle remembering the quilting rules. There's only a few. You know, measure twice, cut once, accurate 1/4 inch seam allowance, press to the dark. Now, some people press open, press wherever happens, and it's okay. But when you're doing a lot of piecing, nestling, making sure points come out, it's really important to press the same way consistently. So whether that's a good reminder of pressing to the background or pressing to the color. And if you have a white background with brights, you always press to the color, not the white. Or in my case, I'm pressing everything to the background. So just a quick way, because it makes everything nestling a whole lot easier. So everything's nice and pressed, right sides together. And what you have is you have two little guys here. You've got one pointed to the black on this side, one pointed to the black on this side, which creates that little lock that you can actually feel. So remember when we were trimming our half square triangle with the block lock and it, slid into that pressed seam? This does the same thing. These two, since they're pressed opposite directions, are going to lock into each other and not want to go any farther. So that is the nestling of your seam. Right there is where you can put your little binder clip to keep that locked in, so you have that perfect point every time. Put a little pin in it, whatever you want. But you can actually feel it. When you are doing it correctly, you can feel those two pieces interlock and create that perfect point. And you're going to go ahead and sew that 1/4 inch seam. Okay, so once our center unit is pieced, we have this little guy in here going on. Again, I press at every step. So on my left and my right, press those, and I press everything out. So I know that this is essentially light, but I'm pressing it out to the darks, out to the darks. So everything just goes all the same. Now, there's nothing wrong saying you can't make this whole unit and then press it if you want to. I just find it's really hard to press that many little bitty seams and little squares all at the end. No matter how big this block is, even if we're just doing this, that is a whole lot of tedious pressing where it can take you just a minute to press those versus the 5 to 10, 15 minutes later to make sure all those come out. Okay, so next step is we're going to do another, essentially a border, where we're going to take our 4 rectangles and sew those on the same way. Now, if you're someone who is not confident in your piecing and possibly cutting, and you only cut your 1.5 inch strips, this is now where you'll take your ruler and you will measure from this edge to this edge. Now, in our pattern, it should be 4.5 inches. If it is bigger, if we are now looking at a 5 inch one, 2 things will have to happen. One, let's check that 1/4 inch again, because your 1/4 inch is too small. It's the iron beeping. The other thing that needs to happen is this unit now needs to be trimmed down so that we can make sure by the time we keep adding borders, we're going to end up in an appropriate size block. So let's check your 1/4 inch because it's too small and trim up, because it should be 4.5. But if you're at like 4 3/4, don't do anything. What I would say is go ahead and cut your 4 background rectangles at 4 3/4. If you are someone who is just sewing for fun and you want to make this block and you don't really care what it ends up being, or maybe you're going to make this block in the future but you want to use your 2.5 inch strips but you're not sure what all that math works out to be, this is the way to work out that math without bringing out the calculator. You can just show your units together and now measure. Oh, with my 2.5 inch strips and my 2.5 inch squares, this is now going to be 5.5. I don't know. So, same thing. Bring these out. Bring our little doodads out. And we're going to sew the exact same way. Sew our top black border on. Sew this guy on. And then piece the square, rectangle, square. Piece, square, rectangle, square. So on. And you're going to do that 3 full times. And then you're going to end up with this beautiful 8.5 inch block. When you're done with these blocks, I want to point out one thing. You'll notice that this is a light gray and these are beige. The pattern totally tells you to do that. It was just running me through a loop when I didn't have the right size squares of cream. Then I looked at the pattern, looked at the color picture, like, no, I have it right. She really does use a different color in the center of her blocks as she does from her little corner units here. So what happens is we're going to make 4 of these. So it's a daunting number of tedious piecing, but you can do it. You can absolutely do it. Now, trick, if you want to, go ahead and cut out a 1.5 inch strip of stash fabric, some 1.5 inch squares of a stash fabric, and a 2.5-inch center. Piece that block into some regular fabric. If you're using a kit from us, using a kit from your store, you put together your own kit. Instead of using the actual fabric to make your block, because you don't want to run the risk of running out, if you're already, you know, slim pickings on what you're using, whatever that is, use stash fabric to make just a sample block. Then you're gonna know, yes, I got this down, I made all of my errors on this one and I don't care, I'm just gonna give it to my cat, whatever. You can also check your color to make sure you really do like it to be gray and beige. You might want to change it. You can totally change it. There's nothing saying you have to do the color she tells you to do. And it'll also make sure your 1/4 inch is accurate, because that is our #1 lesson essentially with this block, is a true 1/4 inch seam allowance. So we make 4 of these, and we also take 2 big old squares to make 4 big old half square triangles again. Now these I think are trimmed to 9 or 9.5 inch. I'm just going to press to the dark and use my 10-inch, 12.5-inch square ruler and trim this. I'm not going to use my block lock because of course I just have a 6-inch block lock, so it's not going to be big enough anyways. Those are going to go on the sides, I think pointed in. And then one of the blocks from last month. She tells you it's going to be the same beige as this one. You can reach whichever one you want. I happen to only have this one done, so this is the one. And then that's your block. You're going to have 4 chain blocks, 4 half square triangle unit blocks, and 1 pinwheel block from last month. You do not make this unit this month. Does that make sense? And you'll see that in your pattern. At the last page of month 1, there's an asterisk against 1. That asterisk is representing the one she wants to use for this block. But again, totally doesn't matter. Whichever one you think looks cute in the middle, use it. All right, and that is month 2 of Color Dance. So make sure if you haven't already, get your pattern, or I think we do still have available on the website. I think we have some shy kits, the same colorway I'm doing. I think I still have some available in the shop. So the other thing this month, remember, our main lesson for the month is accurate cutting, accurate seam allowance. We talked about some ways around if we're struggling to make. Again, quilting is all about having fun. It's a stress reliever. It shouldn't be something that is daunting. You shouldn't be, you know, overwhelmed when you walk into your sewing room. So we talked about some ways to get rid of that overwhelming feeling, but accurate cutting, accurate seam allowance. Use some of the tricks we learned this month to make those things happen, and we will get our chain blocks done. Again, it's a really cool block to do as an alternating block. It makes any basic block, whether it's a solid block, a 4-patch block, a picture quilt, a t-shirt quilt. It just jazzes up that quilt just one extra step. So it's a block that I think you might use a lot in your quilting journey. So we'll see you in just a few weeks for month 3 of our Color Dance.
Thank you for watching our video. We invite you to leave a comment, hit the like button, or better yet, subscribe to our channel so you never miss an episode. You can also visit our Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, or Pinterest pages, or find all of those things and our online store at fabricpatch.net.